So the first step, the first part of this event is contact between Mr. O'Keefe's arm and the vehicle.
Could you describe for the jurors what hypothesis you used based on your review of the information you got from Aperture?
Sure. So the hypothesis that I looked at, Aperture, their testing and report indicates that Mr. O'Keefe had his arm out at a 90-degree angle.
Sustained.
What do you see? By the way, where are these from, these two slides?
These two slides are from the PowerPoint presentation that Aperture provided.
All right, so you didn't create these?
I did not, no, sir.
Describe the angle of the arm in the left photograph with the drinking glass in the hand.
So the angle of that arm is approximately 90 degrees. The other photographs in the PowerPoint demonstrate that for someone the same height as Mr. O'Keefe, the arm would be at about 90 degrees with an individual standing erect. That's what was demonstrated in their PowerPoint.
Do you note anything in their PowerPoint, the Aperture PowerPoint, related to the clothing worn in that left photograph?
Yes, they have the surrogates wearing a hoodie or a sweatshirt, which is the exact same type and brand that Mr. O'Keefe was found wearing at the time of the incident.
Did that play a part in your overall analysis, the fact that the individual, the surrogate, as you used the name, was adorned with the same type of sweatshirt that was found on Mr. O'Keefe?
It did, yes. I mean, that's one of the details that we have to look at. Details matter, so we look at the clothing that was worn and the evidence found with respect to that actual sweatshirt.
I'd like to stay with that for a second. Why is that important? Why would the clothing matter?
Well, because that tells us, that gives us evidence of what may or may not have occurred. Mr. O'Keefe was wearing this sweatshirt when the time of this alleged incident occurred. So if there is contact between his sweatshirt and that rear vehicle, the taillight from the Lexus, there would likely be evidence of that. And we have to look at that sweatshirt to see the condition of that sweatshirt, if there's evidence on that sweatshirt, and be able to pair that or match that up to with what happened on the vehicle.
Is that part of a normal biomechanical analysis to evaluate clothing of the body as well?
Absolutely, especially when you look at automobile pedestrian impacts.
Why?
Because clothing tells you, or can tell you, how the impact occurred, where contact occurred between an individual and the vehicle, what part of the vehicle, what part of the individual. So it either may or it may not, but it can give you very important clues about what may have occurred during the incident.
Is that part of the normal methodology that's utilized in the field of biomechanical analysis, especially as it relates to pedestrian motor vehicle incidents?
It absolutely is, yes. Look at the damage to the clothing. Look if you compare it up to the vehicle, to the ground, to other sources. It's another tool, another detail, and part of the evidence that allows you to try and determine what occurred.
Do you have experience in reviewing clothing of individuals that may have been involved in vehicle pedestrian incidents?
I do, yes.
How often has that played a part in your biomechanical analysis and the methodology that you employ?
It happens quite often when we look at automobile pedestrian impacts. That's really one of the steps that you need to do. You need to look at the clothing, you need to look at that evidence and see if that matches up with any other evidence in the case.
Would it be a proper methodology to just ignore the clothing in a vehicle pedestrian incident?
It would be, yes. I mean, it's really one of the first things you should do.
I'm sorry, my question was, would it be proper if you just wholly ignored it?
No, it would be improper. It would not be proper. It would be improper if you just ignored it.
Getting back to the slide at hand, and we're on slide, just to stay coordinated, is this slide 7?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. You've talked about the left photograph. What is the right, the short video?
So this short video is what I refer to as the paint transfer test that was performed by Aperture. And what they did was take a surrogate the same approximate height and weight as Mr. O'Keefe and had him stand behind a subject, an exemplar Lexus, the same year, make, and model. And they put paint on the rear taillight cover on the fender, and then they backed it in to the surrogate's arm. And the reason for this is they attempted to show that where the paint contacts the arm, that it's the same area where the superficial abrasions were on Mr. O'Keefe's arm.
Did you utilize these photographs and videos from the Aperture report in conducting and building the field testing and or the lab testing that you ultimately undertook?
I did, yes, sir.
Can we go to the next slide, please? What's depicted in this slide?
So this is from the Aperture report, and the third conclusion is that the location and orientation of the lacerations on John O'Keefe's right forearm and arm are consistent with the geometry and the orientation of the right taillight on the Reed 2021 Lexus LX57.
How did you interpret the phrase geometry?
To me, geometry just means shape. So the way I interpreted this is the one test that was performed with respect to the taillight. This is the only test I saw that Aperture performed involving the taillight and the arm, is that with this paint transfer test, they concluded that, again, the area where the paint was transferred onto the arm is consistent, the same shape and orientation as apparently the lacerations found on Mr. O'Keefe's forearm.
Did this test, in your opinion, establish force multipliers that were exerted on the taillight?
It has nothing to do with force. It doesn't describe the force exerted on the taillight or on the arm. It doesn't describe how the arm would have moved as it hit the taillight. It doesn't describe how the taillight would fracture. It doesn't describe how you would actually get the lacerations on the arm. Again, all this does is generally, and I made an error there. This report, and you can see the slide says laceration. Mr. O'Keefe did not have lacerations on his arm.
What did he have?
He was diagnosed with superficial abrasions.
Is there a difference between a laceration and an abrasion?
There's a distinct difference, both biomechanically and medically, yes.
Is that an important distinction?
That is.
Why?
The first step of the biomechanical analysis is identify the injuries, and you have to take the diagnosed injuries identified by a medical doctor. So it's superficial abrasions. To put lacerations on, that's simply incorrect.
So I strike the end of that.
Would you describe the injuries on Mr. O'Keefe's arm as lacerations?
No.
Would they be more properly described in another way?
It would be, yes.
What's that other way?
So they've been diagnosed as superficial abrasions. An abrasion occurs when there's rubbing or scraping of the skin, and it just rubs away the top layer, the epidermis of the skin. Now, a laceration is a jagged ripping or tearing of the skin, which gets down through the epidermis into the dermis. So abrasions take much less force, they're less severe than what a laceration actually is.
In a biomechanical analysis, if it's done properly, is it important to get the proper injury to the body as a foundation to the entire analysis?
That's core to the analysis, because you're trying to determine how an injury occurred. You have to know what that injury is. You have to have the correct injury to be able to evaluate it.
Let's go to the next slide. This is a placeholder. I want to ask you a little bit while this is up. We can turn the lights up. First step in the analysis. What is the first step of the analysis after you determine the injuries, the type of injury?
So in this step, after you determine the injury, what we want to do is we want to look at the physical evidence. So we have the abrasions on Mr. O'Keefe's arm, and we have the sweatshirt that he was wearing at the time. So the first step in any investigation is to determine, does the evidence from the arm match up to the evidence on the sweatshirt?
Did you undertake that analysis?
I did, yes.
Is that indicated in a slide a little bit later on in your PowerPoint?
It is, yes, sir.
Okay. Let's go to the next slide, please. What are we looking at in this slide?
So this explains the injuries, and this is from on the left side, that is the diagnoses from the autopsy. The right side is from the hospital. And you can see it says blunt impact injuries of head and extremities, abrasions, and lacerations. The laceration is on the back of the skull, on the back of the head where the occipital skull fracture is. When you look at the extremities, everywhere where it talks about the extremities, it's superficial abrasions. So the first step in a biomechanical analysis, you review the medical records, determine exactly what the injuries are. And you can see there's a picture of the actual abrasions. Those are the documented injuries or abrasions to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm.
Are these acceptable sources? Well, let me ask you this. What are the sources that are reflected on this slide that you referred to or you relied on in coming to your opinions and conclusions regarding Mr. O'Keefe's injuries to his right arm?
Again, on the left side is from the autopsy report from the medical examiner, and then the right side is actually from the Good Samaritan hospital where Mr. O'Keefe was taken.
Are autopsy records, hospital records, medical records acceptable sources for a biomechanist to rely on in determining or coming to opinions and conclusions?
They are. They are the sources you go to determine what the injuries are. Yes.
Did you see? You reviewed the entirety of the medical records as well as the entirety of the medical examiner's file. Is that right?
I did. Yes, sir.
Did you see reference to any fractures that were noted on Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, either his arm, his forearm, or his hand?
No, there were no diagnosed or references to fractures on any part of his right arm or hand.
I'm going to ask Mr. Wolk to display a couple of exhibits, the x-rays.
Okay.
So he's going to take over the TV screen.
Sure.
If that's okay, Your Honor?
Yes.
This is an exhibit that was marked yesterday. I want to say 226. I may be wrong, Your Honor. I'll get the right nomenclature in just a second. This is one of the exhibits, one of three exhibits that was introduced yesterday. Do you recognize what's depicted on this?
That's the X-ray of Mr. O'Keefe's right hand taken January 31st, I believe.
Did you review this in furtherance of your analysis?
I did, yes, sir.
Was it part of the medical record? Medical records or ladies' records?
It was a series of the X-rays. Yes, was attached. It was part of the medical records that were provided to me and that I reviewed in this matter.
Thank you. Just for the record, so I can clarify, this is Exhibit 229A, as in apple. Do you see? Have you looked at X-rays before?
I have, yes.
Have you interpreted X-rays in furtherance of your analyses in years past?
I have during my biomechanical analysis, yes.
Are you trained to look at X-rays and determine whether there are fractures, hairline fractures, broken bones, things of that nature?
I've been doing this for 20 years. In graduate school, I worked with surgeons and doctors to look at X-rays.
Is that part of the normal methodology that biomechanists undertake in furtherance of injury analysis?
It is part of what we normally do, yes, sir.
Would it be an important part of a biomechanist's ultimate analysis and conclusions as it relates to an injury analysis?
It would be, and especially in this case, if we're talking about impact to the arm and the hand, very important to determine, as I said, not only what the actual injuries are, but what injuries did not occur.
Would it be appropriate to come to any opinions and conclusions in an injury analysis if you were to ignore X-rays, if they existed?
No. If X-rays exist, you need to review them. You need to determine what they represent and what injuries either did or didn't occur. You absolutely need to look at them.
Do you see any injuries represented or any defects represented in this X-ray of Mr. O'Keefe's right hand?
I do not, no, sir.
Can you describe what you do see or what you would expect to see if there were injuries, broken bones, torn ligaments, things of that nature, swelling? What would you expect to see?
You could actually see the fracture lines on the bones. They are evident along the hands or along the ulna and the radius. Any dislocations you see, there would be a difference in the space at the joints between the bones. Dislocation, then there would be increased space or even a decreased space if there's compression of the joints, the interphalangeal joints, the metacarpophalangeal joints, the wrist joint. There's no indication on these X-rays of any fractures or any trauma or any type of injury to the bones or the joints.
Can we go to 229B as in Bravo with the court's permission?
Yes.
You see what's depicted in this photograph?
I can, yes, sir.
What is this?
So this is a X-ray. The forearm shows the ulna and the radius, which are the two bones in the forearm.
Do you see any defects, injury, trauma to these bones or anything associated with those bones?
I do not. And when you're viewing this on the software to look at the x-rays, you can actually adjust the contrast. So you can adjust the brightness and the darkness, and it allows you to go through the whole range to better evaluate whether there are any fractures. This is a little bright, so when you're looking at this, you would actually decrease the contrast a little bit.
In terms of your review of this particular photograph, what did you note in terms of trauma or injuries at all?
I did not note any indication or any signs of trauma or injury to the forearm or to the wrist in this case.
If we could go to 229C as in Charlie, what are we looking at in this photograph?
This is the right humerus, the right upper bone of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm.
Do you notice, or did you note, did you review this in furtherance of your analysis?
I did, yes, sir.
Did you note any defects, trauma, injuries at all with regard to the, I'm sorry, the bone is the
humerus.
The humerus?
I did not, no, sir.
What about the joints associated with the humerus, top or bottom?
I did not note any injuries or damage to either the elbow or the shoulder joint either.
What is your opinion and conclusion, having reviewed all three of these x-rays, with regard to the condition of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, starting from the arm, the forearm, and the bones in the hand?
There's no indication of any type of acute injury from the x-ray to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, either his hand, his forearm, or his upper arm.
Thank you. We can switch that back. And if we can go back to your PowerPoint. What are we looking at in this slide?
So again, this is the hoodie or sweatshirt that Mr. O'Keefe had on at the time of this alleged incident.
Did you consider these photographs in conducting your injury causation analysis?
I did, yes, sir.
What role did these photographs of Mr. O'Keefe's hoodie play in your injury causation analysis?
So this shows the hoodie, and it was inspected by the police department, and it was noted, as you can see on the right sleeve by the triangles, there were 9 different punctures or holes noted in the sleeve of the sweatshirt.
Can we go to the next slide, please? What are we looking at in these series of photos?
So let's move to sidebar for a minute, and Mr. Jackson, bring your PowerPoint, please.
Sure.